Alright, C++ Chapter 1. Welcome. This video might get kind of long, we'll see. Depends on how long-winded I get. Plus I've got some allergies kicking in over the summer, so it's not going to be the best. But it helps if you have your your Visual Studio program open, and that way you can kind of switch back and forth as you're watching the video. You can also follow through some of the examples. Alright, so why the puzzle theme? Well, coding is kind of like putting a puzzle together. You've got a whole bunch of small different pieces that you have to put together to get the output that you want. It's like trying to make yourself go from your bedroom to the kitchen. You have to open your eyes, and then you have to sit up in the bed, and then you have to rotate to get out of bed, and then you have to stand up, then you have to like turn left and take 3 steps, and then turn left or left again and go 3 steps, that kind of stuff. So that's really coding. And the thing is, there's always going to be a part where you're working on one section and it doesn't work for you, and then you're having problems and you're stuck. If that's the case, move on to another section, get everything else done. That's kind of the nice thing about coding is it's not like a linear process. You can work on the end and then go back and work on the middle, that kind of stuff. So if you get stuck, work on another part of it, and hopefully that'll help you. Now, you only get better at coding by doing it. It's a lot like driving a car. When you first, you go to driver's ed, you drive the car a few times, then you go get your license. They drive you around the block, basically. And then you get a driver's license, and everybody congratulates you, and you're all proud. But then you get in the car behind the wheel the first time, you're like, I don't really have that much experience, and you're actually very nervous. And that's really the way you're going to be at the end of this class. This class isn't going to teach you everything you need to know about coding. When you get done, you're not going to be a master coder. We're going to walk through basic concepts, and you're going to build a couple applications, but then after that, the only way to get better is for you to keep doing it, to keep practicing. For those of you guys that just do the projects in class and then you don't touch anything else, you're never going to get a good job as a coder. And that's the whole point of college. You're here to get a skill that you can use in the real world. But most of us come out of high school with that mindset it's grades, grades, grades. Doesn't matter what your grade is. If you're a good coder, you'll get a good job. So focus. All right, so some origins about C++. C++ is just C. So there was a programming language called C way, way back in the day. It was the basis of Unix. So basically what they did was some guy developed some new, more modern procedures for C++, and then he wanted to call it like C, C version 1 or version 2. He wanted to add 1 to it. So plus plus means to add 1 in C. So that's why it's C++, because it's C plus 1. So it's a newer version of C, if that helps. So that's what the plus plus means. It just means it's C and then one version above. So it's considered a high-level language. Assembly would be an example of a low-level language. It is very similar, a lot of the same stuff as C or C#. I think later on in class I'll show you some scripts of C#, and you'll be able to read pretty much most of them because you know C++. All right, your book talks about object-oriented printing, or I'm sorry, object-oriented programming. I'm such a crackhead. All right, so OOP, not like OPP, if you know me. All right, so object-oriented programming has 3 characteristics: encapsulation, inheritance, and polymorphism. Encapsulation means the user doesn't see the code behind it. All they're seeing is the window that tells them, hey, here's the temperature. They have no idea what code is behind that program that just showed them the temperature. And then inheritance means it's reusable code. As a coder, I can write something that does something, and then I can pull out pieces of that code and use them in other programs that I do, so I don't have to reinvent the wheel. And then polymorphism means I can have a single name and it has multiple meanings. So I could have multiple variables or different objects in my program that have the same name, and each name could be something different depending on where it's being used and how it's being used. So it's a lot like the word bat. could mean an object that's flying around, or something that you swing at a ball. If I said, hey, I went to a baseball game and I got a bat, that you would know exactly what I'm talking about. Or if I said, hey, I was walking around out in the woods and a bat flew into my hair, you would know what I was talking about. So it's the way it's used. We can use that. A single name can have multiple meanings depending on how it's used. Now, when you see stuff like this pop up, you know right away, hey, there's probably going to be a test question on the first exam that covers one of these. And it'll say, hey, what's the process where a single name can have multiple meanings? And then your options will be encapsulation, inheritance, or polymorphism. And you would say polymorphism. Way to go. All right. If you've had any prior programming experience, like when I came into C++, I had programmed in Pascal. And in Pascal, we had procedures. But in C++, all of that stuff, whether it's a procedure or method or whatever, in C++ we call it a function. So if you have any prior experience, any of that stuff that you learned before, in C++ we call it a function. And just like procedures in Pascal or anything else, you have to declare them before they're being used, or they have to be, before the call, so that when they're called, the program knows what they are. I can't just say, hey, let's talk about Brian. Oh, Brian's the guy down the street, because computers don't work that way. I have to, hey, Brian's the guy down the street, and then I have to talk about Brian, because your computer reads things in a linear order. So if it doesn't know who Brian is, it'll error out on Brian because it's never discussed Brian before. So when we get into functions and stuff like that, we'll talk about that. But when we talk about variables today, we'll talk about declaring them before they're being used. All right, so what does a sample C++ program look like? So this is a sample. So we have some statements at the top that kind of say, hey, include these libraries. And libraries are just different groups of commands or processes or that kind of stuff that we want to include so we can add those to our program. So it's almost like, I guess, formatting information. Hey, I'm going to use stuff out of this library. I'm going to use stuff out of this library, so make sure you include them. So it tells the compiler, which is the application that takes your program and makes it into a running version. It tells the compiler, what different codes you need to include so that your code will work, if that helps. So we do include IO stream. And we're going to use the namespace standard, and we'll talk about those later on. And then there's a main program, and then this is the main program that you have, and this is actually a function, but we'll talk about that later. So in the main here, we have a variable, and the variable is called number of languages. So this is an integer value. And then we have cout, which means console out, which means this is going to be displayed to the user. So they're going to see hello reader, and then in the next line it's going to say welcome to C++, next line, so /n is the next line. And then cout again, how many programming languages have you used? And then they're going to type in a number, like I've used 2. And then whatever they type in at the end of this is now going to come into the console and become the variable number of languages. So we talked about how you have to declare something first. So here they declare the integer number of languages, the value, or I'm sorry, the identifier or the variable, and then here is where it gets populated. So whenever somebody types in 5, that 5 now goes into number of languages. So 5 is the value of number of languages. And then they have a simple statement. If number of languages is less than 1, say read the preface, you may prefer a more elementary book by the same author. Or, in this case, else, if number of languages is not less than 1, it's going to say enjoy the book. So, hello reader, welcome to C++, how many programming languages have you used? And then you're going to type in a number. And then it's going to say, based on the number, if you've never used a programming language before, it's going to say, hey, go get a more elementary book. And if you used more than 1 or more, it's going to say, enjoy the book. And that's going to return 0. So return 0 just means I'm going to return nothing, and I'm going to terminate the program. So that's really how the programs are laid out. You've got some information at the top that tells the compiler what to include and where your commands are going to kind of come from. And then you have your main program. And then everything is within the curly braces. All right. If you're really confused and you don't remember what any of this stuff stands for, that's okay. At this point, I just want you to know kind of like the breakdown of things and how it's going to work out. So at this point, do me a favor, pause the video, and we're going to open up Visual Basic. And I'm going to show you how to format your first program that we're going to walk through today. All right, so my Visual Basic is down here on the taskbar. I'm going to fire it off. And you're going to do New Project, Win32 console application, and we're just going to call this Test. Now, by default, it goes to your document folder under Visual Studio. So if I go to, let me finish this. Just hit finish there. And wait. All right. So if you go to your libraries and go to your documents, you'll see a Visual Studio folder. Inside Visual Studio, there's projects. And then here's where your projects will be. So by default, they're stored on your C drive unless you point them somewhere else. So this is where you should be. This is what should show up then when you first load this. Now, we're going to format this differently. You're going to keep this first include statement, but then you're going to add two new include statements. And they are include IOStream. Now, that's like the main C++ library. And then we're also going to include a special command called string. So number sign include, and then greater than, less than sign, then your stuff in the middle. So IOStream and string. So IOStream is like the main C++ library. It's your input-output library. And then string is just I want you to support this command. Now, all the other commands like cin, cout, to display stuff to the screen, to go stuff out of the screen, stuff like that, is all using standard commands. So then we need to do using namespace std. And that stands for standard, not, the other one. All right, so that's what we're going to put on the front. So that's all information for our compiler. Now, your main program looks like this. And I tend to get rid of this and just do a void main. And if I do that, then I don't have to return anything. Void means I'm not going to return anything. So I no longer have to have this return down here. And I can do some space. So doesn't that look a lot neater? Remember, when you're writing programs not just for you, but for other people. And if you're a gamer, and you're a game developer, and you're developing games that you want other people to mod, do different things with, you want your code to be as clean as possible to help people to be able to write stuff for your game to increase the longevity. Think about games like Skyrim. Skyrim's been out for years, and there's still mods being created for Skyrim, which keeps the game going and keeps sales going. All the time, some younger brother sees his older brother, playing with a mod for Skyrim, says, "Oh, I'm going to go buy that game," and then he buys it on sale for $10 off Steam, and then the company continues to make money. So you want your code to be as clean as possible. Plus, whenever you get your first coding job, obviously there are going to be other people that look at your code. So if you write clean code, everybody appreciates that. So this is how our code is going to start. We're going to have some information at the top for the compiler, and then we're going to have a main block, and then inside this block here, that's where we're going to write our main program. Now, as we move on in the class, we'll start adding things, above main, like our functions and different things like that. But for this part, that's all we're going to have is we're going to have the information for the compiler, then we're going to have our main program. So this is how you're going to format things from this point on. All right, back to our slides. So we've talked about this. Remember, at the top, you're going to have your libraries. Which libraries do you want to include? And again, that's for the compiler. The compiler says, hey, I need to include this information so that these commands make sense. IOStream is your input-output stream, like that kind of, you get the idea. You know what input output is. And then we also want to include the command string, because that's a special command, so we need to do include string. So that's why we're going to add those two. Now, we also do using namespace standard. Now, whenever you go online, like eventually you're gonna have a problem with your code. You're gonna be like, oh crap, I can't get this code to work. I don't know how to work this. I'm gonna go look online and figure it out. You're gonna see stuff like this: std double colon and then cout in their code, and you're gonna be like, what the heck? We don't do that. If I do using namespace standard, I can use all the commands like this. If I don't include this command in the beginning, then all my commands have to have this std double colon on there. So it's all a matter of preference and how you want to use it. So jumping back here, I can do, cout, and then all right, let me just stop you guys right now. I am a terrible typist. When I was a kid, you did not want to go to keyboarding class because that was only for girls that were going in secretary. So you did not want to do that. So I am a plinker. 2 fingers out, plink, 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 and I always screw up the arrows for C in and C out. So don't make fun of me too much. All right, so here's my first C out. So C out, double brackets or double or less than signs, and how are you, and then the double brackets and end line. So if I run this, now once you've got a piece of code that you want to test, just click on debug and then hit start without debugging. And you'll get this, project's out of date, blah, blah, blah. Just hit don't show me this again. Build it, yes, of course I want to build it. And you'll get this. So my program right now says, hi, how are you? So everything works. But if I took out this using namespace standard, all right, come on, what the, you little, and remove that, now you notice how this red line kind of popped up underneath my cout. So cout no longer works. I would now have to do std double colon cout. And then end doesn't work. That's a standard command. So I now have to do std double colon. Now, that's what I'm talking about between the using namespace standard. And you'll see if you go online and look for sample code, people do this all the time. And being new to coding myself, I don't understand why they have never learned that command. Using namespace standard, one command at the top fixes all this so I don't have to keep typing in the same thing over and over again, a zillion times. But it could just be they learned it a long time ago, before you could do this, whatever version of using namespace standard came out. Remember, I think right now we're in version C++ 12. So if you learned it a long time ago, you might not have learned the new commands like that to prevent you from having to type all the extra stuff. So going back to the slides, if you see this std double colon, it just means that they are not using the using namespace standard at the top in the libraries. So they have to type that out for every command, well, most of the commands. So that's what that does. So if you're online and you're looking around for samples of code and you see that, now you know what that is. All right, so anything above the main is typically either used by the compiler or it's a function, something like that. So right now, I just want you to, anything above the main is just going to be stuff for the compiler. Hey, we're going to use the namespace standard. We're going to do the input-output stream, that kind of stuff. And then we're just going to do our main program. Later on, when we get into functions, we'll declare our functions, but above main. You can possibly even write your functions above main. But at this point, we're just going to have our library or our compiler information, and then we're going to have our main program. So main is the coding that you want the program to run. So things like functions or whatever, anything that's called inside the main is typically executed outside of main. So main is just the commands you want the program to run. And then functions and other items like that are reusable code that you can have outside of main that maybe main might call and pull that back in later on, something like that. So remember, like when we first opened up Visual Studio, how it had main with a whole bunch of weird stuff. You could also do, integer main double brackets and then end it with return 0, because if you're doing integer main, you're saying, hey, you have to return an integer. And then I can return 0 because 0 is an integer. I prefer to use void main brackets, and then the way I don't have to return anything. And then I guess I don't want to say I'm safe, but I don't have to worry about that, and my code, I think, it looks a little bit cleaner. Because your stuff will run in main, but it's just a matter of, is there some special output that you want main to do? In this case, no, we just want main to execute and stop. So for this class, and if you're moving on to the advanced C++ class, and then you have Morosco as your teacher, he typically does the same thing. He does void main. All right, so your basic input-output, and those are the two commands, and it's console out and console in. So C out and C in. So C is for console, then the direction of the content. Do I want it to go out to the screen or into the computer? Depending on what book you read or who you talk to, some people say C is for character, characters out to the screen, characters into the computer, however, you get the idea. But then they're followed by a greater than or less than sign. Now, no matter how I try to remember it, I always screw up the arrows. Then as soon as I see a little red thing underneath the arrows, I know, hey, I screwed those up. But one way to remember them is, if we want the words to go out, we point the pointers, we take the words and point them to out. So, hey, I want hello world to go out to the screen, or we want to insert this. So if you say it that way, hey, I want to send, hello world out to the screen, then I know which way my arrows go, because it goes from hello world to the word out. And if I want to insert something into a variable or do a cin, I know it's in and then message. So that might help you. It has not helped me. I know at this point you're wondering, what in the world am I taking this class with this dude for? Sorry. That's all I can say. All right, so now we know what C in and C out does. Let's do some, before we review, let's do some stuff on the screen. All right, so here I am. Remember, whatever you do C out, you're going to see on the screen. So remember, I typically tend to put spaces between the word C out and the double brackets. You don't have to. It can be like that. Oop, you can't remove the T. So you don't have to have spaces. I tend to, and I have no idea why I do that. It just looks better to me. So again, now we can do C out. How old are you? Oop, I did not put my, again, I'm terrible typist. And then end line. So I typically do end line, but you can also do /n. And that'll work the same way. And again, we'll talk about that on the slides in just a little bit. Now, how old are you? So now you're asking them to give you some input. All right, why is it not taking it? Did I do that wrong? All right, I'll fix that in a minute. So I'll just leave it there. So now you're asking them to type something. Hey, how old are you? So you want them to type something in. So now you have to use a cin because you want to input that data. And we're going to insert that, so we go point into the whatever the thing is. And now we need a variable. So we're going to call this variable age. And then we can just leave it like that. Now notice when we type that in, it says it underlines age and says, hey, I can't use this. Now, anybody guess why we can't use age like that? All right, whoever said we didn't declare it, that's correct. So basically, remember, your program reads from main down. So it's like, hey, how old are you? Or, hey, how are you? How old are you? And I want to take that value and put it into age. But it's like, hey, wait a minute, I can't put this in age because I don't even have an age. I don't even know what age is. What's going on here? So we have to create that. We have to define or declare the variable first. So in this case, I'm going to type in an integer because it's going to be an integer value. And I'm going to call it age and just leave it at that. I do that every time too. So now we're all set, and then we can do cout age. Oh my gosh. Okay, and any of you guys have Morosco for another class this semester or in the fall, do not tell him how bad I type. He already knows, but I don't need any more hassling from him. So here I declare the integer age, and then I give them, hey, hi, how are you? Hey, how old are you? And then it waits for them to put input. And then they type in age, and then it's going to show them their age. And I can also do cout, you are, oh my gosh, I'm so terrible at this. Let me give it space there. All right, da-da. So you see how I did that? Cout you are, and then I put another bracket, and I put the variable age, and then another bracket, and then years old. So if I run this, hi, how are you? How old are you? I am 5, because I typed like a 5-year-old. Enter. You are 5 years old. So that's how Cin and Cout work. Cout goes out to the screen. If you have a Cout followed by a Cin, it waits for data because it knows, hey, he's asking you to put something in, so I can't function past in the main. I can't go past this until you give me a value to put in this variable. And then once you do, then that variable now becomes, a variable, and I can add that variable by name anywhere else in my program. So hope that clears up the Cin, Cout for you. All right, I'm going to stop the video here because most of us only have about a 30-minute attention span. Then we start wandering off and we're, oh, I hate it. So I'm going to stop this first video here, and then the second video will pick up right here, and then we'll start talking about variables more. So I guess I'll see you in video 2. Oh, while you're waiting or whatever, this would be a good time to play with Cin and Cout and mess with stuff, just to see what you can kind of come up with. Because your first project is going to have you, manipulate some stuff on the screen and make it, come out some other way. So Cin and Cout are going to be very big in your first project. All right, see you in video 2.